How did you compose this piece? Do you remember?
I have no idea. No, I think it's a little. It's like the one. It's like the way I described for the pianist preparations.
Yeah, with the systems. And,
I think so. I think so. I can't guarantee it because I can't remember quite when I got those ideas. But
was this written before or after?
it's before. It's
Before,
earlier,
yeah.
so it may not have in fact had that. But
was this the first one that you wrote for prepared piano?
no, the four
piano.
prepared piano is
Yeah.
the four pieces.
The first one we did.
Yeah, that's
right,
the very first one. Yeah. And then this was the next one, which is a little much. The style is quite different. It's more complicated. This is affected by the European avant-garde music, the Boulez Stockhausen kind of. There's very complicated kind of writing that comes from that world. Though I think the music is very different, and the silences are not like Europeans didn't have that at all. But these complicated rhythmic things, and then the stuff all over the keyboard, and difficult piano technique, that's all kind of inspired by the Europeans. And,
you were more busy with Europeans than Cage, right?
no, we were all interested. I mean, there was a short time when we all thought we were doing the same thing.
Yeah.
We were all in it together. It didn't last long, but for just into this time, we were all interested in each other's work. We went back. They came to New York. Went to Europe. David Tudor played all of this music. He played both. I mean, he played Stockhausen and he played Cage and Boulez and my music and Feldman and so forth.
So he was the performer for everyone.
Yeah, exactly. And he, at the time, was probably the only person who could really play all that music, and for whom it was written. I mean, the Stockhausen Klavierstücke were really written, at least the first, say, 6 or 7 were written with David Tudor in mind.
Yeah. Why was that?
Because he was such an astonishing pianist. He could play these impossible things.
Was it only because of the virtuosity? Because
Combination of virtuosity. Yeah, it is obviously virtuous, but it was a special kind of. He had a kind of. Well, you can hear it a little bit from that recording we listened to. A very precise way of playing, which they liked a lot. And he was not frightened of any complexity. He didn't mind that. I mean, it's not virtuosity in the sense of playing Liszt transcendental etudes, but it's more virtuosity, seeing a mess of notes and actually enjoying the process of sorting out how to do them and the best way to do them and how to work it out. He really liked doing it. It was like puzzles, which he wanted to solve. And combined with this extraordinary, he didn't have a beautiful tone, which they didn't care about. But he had this way of being able to make single sounds very precisely, and of controlling dynamics in astonishing ways. I mean, and especially from one, because this isn't so bad, but if you look at the Stockhausen scores, there'd be fortissimo, mezzo piano, pianissimo, forte, all within that much time. All of that. And Tudor could do that. I mean, he was really interested in getting that kind of precision and that kind of touch on the piano.
So that again is virtuosity in one way.
It's certainly a virtuosity, but of a different kind. It's not playing fast and loud, but it being able to play was very exact.
But did it have anything at all with his interest for the music?
Oh yeah, no. This is what he wanted to play. He didn't play anything else.
Because was there anyone else? Was there a big interest for this music amongst pianists?
Certainly not among pianists. No, they took one look and said, "No way." I mean, partly they looked to them impossible to play. They didn't think it could be played. It's really interesting to see that because you started with music that's unplayable, and now just about every other pianist plays it. I mean, it gets completely changed. But like Cage's music of changes, for instance, the only person who would go anywhere near that piece was David Tudor, and it wasn't until 20 years later that any number of pianists will do it. There's a very good German one who came fairly early. It was Herbert Henk. It was recorded actually. The music of change. He's very, very good. Excellent pianist.
Yeah, I like that.
But then there were others, and now I don't even know who they all are.
Have you had contact with Herbert Henk?
I've met, I know him a little bit. Yeah. He's an interesting person. I mean, he's very kind of very quiet, and he doesn't push himself at all. He doesn't make a career at all. He's interested in these sort of strange, esoteric kinds of music. And then he did it for a while. He had a journal, a very good new music journal. which I guess it ran out of steam, but they did 5 big issues. And so he was interested in sort of theoretical matters. And he wrote a long, elaborate analysis of one of the Stockhausen Klavierstücke. It's like a 90-100 page booklet. Just completely, works the whole thing out. Which is amazing. So there are these good pianists out there.
Do you think your music, the American music, is played enough as today?
I mean, what's enough? I think, sure. I mean, I don't have problems getting my music played. Cage, I think, Cage was played so much that now he's played less, I noticed that. But the one I think who gets played the most, well, I don't know about, but the one who has sort of very high status, at least has had a high status for the last 4 or 5 years, is Feldman, especially in Germany. They think he's the best. I mean, they like him better than Cage. They think he's really fantastic. Oh, what's that dog doing up there?
Did we get out?
Well, she isn't in, but it's rather far away for her, to be honest. As long as she comes back, I guess it's okay. Alright. Okay. I should check my beats.
Yeah, you do that.
Yeah.
So, first I'm just going to ask you a little bit about your background. So, what is your background?
You mean musical?
Both.
Okay.
You tell me about your family in Germany.
Yeah. Okay. My parents are German-Austrian, and on my father's side, there's a sort of a musical. My father played cello; he's quite musical, and my grandfather was a professional musician. He was a professor of music in Bonn, and also a composer. But my parents left Germany in 1933. And I was born in 1934 in France. And then I was taken to Italy, back to France. And then in 1941 we had to leave. And we went by way of Spain, Portugal, came to New York, which is basically where I grew up.
In New York?
New York, yes, which was a very lucky thing for me. Because first of all I found, or someone found for me, a wonderful piano teacher. This took a while, but finally, a really good piano teacher called Greta Zoltan. Who was the pianist who John Pietro, the Tito Strauss. She was a good friend of Cage's, and as a result, I got introduced to Cage through her. In fact, I got sent to him to study composition. When I was 16, I had hoped to become a pianist, but I wasn't very good, so I started composing instead. And I started composing, originally I just tried it, but I really got going under a very strong impression made by hearing actually 2 things, Bartók and music of Schoenberg, Berg and Weber.
Did you meet Schoenberg?
No. It's true, theoretically I could have, but he lived on the West Coast.
Yeah.
And I had no, there were no connections there. Well, except for the fact that there were a lot of musicians in our life. My parents were close friends of pianist Rudolf Serkin and his family, and also the violinist Adolf Busch. And Rudolf Serkin had actually studied with Schoenberg when he was very young in Vienna, when he came to study Vienna. But Busch made him stop doing that, because Busch was a Reger student, and he thought Schoenberg was all wrong, he shouldn't do that. So
what did you think about Schoenberg?
I liked it very much. I was more interested somehow in Berg and Weber. And the reason for that is that I liked the sounds that these were the string quartet music, the sort of lyric suite of Berg and the 5 pieces and the bagatelles of Weber. And I really liked the sounds that they made with the strings. This exploration of the possibilities of string writing, which I'd never heard before. Whereas Schoenberg, I think the piece on that program was the 4th string quartet. Was more, how could you say, had more to do with notes, with pitches. And I thought that the Berg and Weber, and especially Weber, had more to do with sonority, with sound as such. So that, I was drawn more to that than to Schoenberg. But on the other hand, the first music that I actually played of that kind was, apart from the Bartók Mikrokosmos, were the Schoenberg Opus 11. Not the difficult one, but certainly the first one. I worked on the first one with Great Desertful.
Yeah.
But that music made me think, you know, in that way when you're very young, you're a little unrealistic. But I thought, when I heard that music, I thought, okay, I can do that too.
Yeah.
I mean, when I love Mozart and Bach and Beethoven and all that stuff, but I realized that there's no way I could do that.
Yeah.
At least without, you know, studying for many, many years and so forth. And I didn't really want to do that because it would be difficult to do it better than they did.
Yeah. So,
whereas the other music, it wasn't that I was going to make it better, but at least I knew that I could do something like that.
Yeah.
And that's what I wanted to do. Like that, but not the same. You know, you don't want to repeat things. So, and what the music felt to me like music that was experimental, was exploratory. They were trying to discover things.
So you were drawn to the
And that's what I was. That's exactly. Yeah. And that spirit of trying to find out things, and being willing to try things, say, with instruments that hadn't been done before, that would be regarded as peculiar. Or, you know.
How old were you when you were inspired by?
I must have been about 15,
Okay.
14, 15 in there. Yeah.
Did you meet? That's when you met Cage, right?
16 next
16,
year.
yeah.
But I'd had that experience. In fact, I even had known Cage's music before I met him. Not very well, but that's what I was telling you about. Before this, somebody had given me this pile of music from the New Music Quarterly, which was a publication that just published music, started at least by Henry Cowell. And there were, among the pieces there were the mores of Cage for prepared piano and percussion. And that's when I first encountered the notion of preparing a piano.
Yeah, so that was your first meeting with prepared piano. Yeah.
And I found it extremely interesting, and I went right away and tried it.
So you prepared the piano then, when you got music?
Yep.
Was it Amores that you tried
Yes.
to prepare first? Yes.
Yeah.
Did you play it with percussionists?
No, I couldn't. There's no way I could. In those days, percussionists didn't exist. I mean, percussionist was the person who played the timpani in the orchestra.
Okay.
You know? I mean, there were no percussionists.
No.
Or else they played in a jazz band or something like that.
Yeah,
But
right.
like now, you have dozens of people who do any kind of percussion work, but that was not the case then.
Yeah. But you were composing at this time, right?
I was making my efforts at composing.
Did you use? How did you use Weber or Berg or Schoenberg?
Well, not directly. Not directly. I mean, I did do one thing. It was kind of funny because there were two things that interested me. Well, a number of things, but two in particular that I remember. One was that I was interested in dissonance. So I would try to make musical fabric that was as dissonant as possible. So I made a piece, for instance, I made a kind of canon for 4 violins, which was as close as you could get. It was like a cluster, really, except that it was made through counterpoint. And I don't know where I got that idea, because, I mean, the dissonance, of course, came from hearing that music. Actually, came both from Bartók. Bartók liked dissonance I mean, Bartók is interesting because it's a mixture of modal writing with a willingness to use dissonance very freely, and I think the dissonance in Bartók has to do again with sonority, with the quality of it. Has a really, he liked in those early music, especially earlier, well, 20s and 30s pieces. The dissonance seems to me to have to do with the quality of sound. It doesn't have to do with pitch logic. It has to do with giving edge to the sound, making it sound really hard, and that interested me. And then in the Schoenberg Weber music, that of course was totally chromatic, and again primarily, which means primarily, really based on minor seconds, sevenths, all those intervals are the main intervals. Occasionally you might get a third, but you never get a triad. You never get any of the sort of beautiful sound world of classical music. This was another direction. And so that had an effect on me. But the actual structure of the music, I don't think did have much of an effect. No.
Because I always, when I read about you and your composing, almost everyone mentions Webern. So I thought, what's...
Yeah, no, there is this thing with Webern, and I think that actually didn't, the effect of it, well, arguably you could say you see it a little bit in a piece like the For Prepared Piano. What interested me in Webern, well, that didn't really happen until I met Cage, because when I met Cage to study, which we didn't do for very long, but we did it long enough to do a couple of exercises, one of which was to analyze, I was supposed to analyze the first movement of the Webern Symphony.
This is when you were, you and Cage were like teachers.
When we first met, yes, exactly, yeah. It's 1950, yeah, actually just 1950. And even though I actually had never heard the piece, he had heard it, it had been played at the New York Philharmonic for the first time. And he'd gone and he was completely, entranced by the music. He really loved the music. And he went, and you couldn't buy it, he went to the library and copied out, this is like Bach and Buxtehude. He went and copied out the first movement and then gave it to me to analyze. And but even just from doing the analysis, not actually hearing the piece, I was really very, very attracted to the image of the sound, which is, it's two things, both of which have been very important for me. One, the more traditional one, is the counterpoint, because the first movement of the symphony is a double canon. It's a very strict counterpoint, but written in such a way that you can't hear it as counterpoint, because the melodic material, or the lines, if you will, are constantly broken. I mean, you'll have a sound here, and also, this Webern thing that he does with the so-called Klangfarbe melody, where he'll say the line of one, so what do you call it, the theme of the canon, say, will start with horn, and then it will go to violin pizzicato, and then it will go to clarinet, and then it will go to harp. And that will be the melodic movement. But of course you don't hear, what you hear is a horn sound, and a violin sound, and a clarinet sound, and a harp sound, right? So that idea of both having logic there, right, and at the same time just making sound, attracted me very much. And to do that in that piece, what he did was, and that's the second thing. The first thing then is this counterpoint, but this special kind of counterpoint. But the second idea is the kind of space and the transparency. That every sound, you can hear every sound just for itself. Even though every sound actually comes from somewhere and leads somewhere else in the kind of number logic of the piece, the 12-tone thing. But that combination of transparency and logic, if you will, and sonority and just pure sound attracted me very much. And you could say that that has some effect. I mean, I never wrote 12-tone music. I did briefly, actually, before I met Cage, I did one counterpiece, which was it was a kind of reinvent. I didn't know about the 12-tone system, but I kind of invented one. And it wasn't. So, but that just comes from thinking chromatically, I think, and also thinking systematically. In other words, wanting to have some way of dealing with the pitches that wasn't just arbitrary. You just didn't, as opposed to just writing what you felt. You wanted some system which helped you, guided you to decide. And anyway, the effect of the Webern, you could say there's some effect in something like the piece, the For Prepared Piano pieces, because there's quite a lot of space. I mean, there's no counterpoint, because it's always one line. But in a sense, there is a counterpoint, because do you remember the first one, where the writing is down, but instead of this way, it goes down, and but you hear it this way, right? But the logic is this way. So there's a kind of logic is in one place, and what you're actually hearing is in another place. That's a kind of, you might say the Webern has a similar thing where the logic is this canon and the 12-tone system, but what you hear are just these sounds. So I suppose that you could say that's the way that the Webern would have an effect. But of course the pieces don't sound remotely like Webern. They don't have anything to do with pitch.
No, not at all.
And so forth.
What about the Dadaists and the Futurists? Did they have anything to say?
I don't think so. No. I didn't know much about them at the time. I might have. I liked the poetry of Paul Éluard, French poet, who was associated to a certain extent with the Surrealists, but was not at the same time was a poet who whose poetry was very direct. It was mostly love poetry, and there was no doubt, what he was talking about. His images were unusual and striking, but at the same time, the material was very straightforward. The meaning, if you will, or whatever, the themes, and that attracted me. I liked the poetry of E. Cummings, American poet, who again. Basically, what he's saying is very straightforward, but he says it in interesting and fun. He's the one who breaks up words across the page. I don't know if you've seen them, but they're so in a funny way, it's a mixture of what you might call modernism with a directness of expression. Yeah, or a directness of material to be expressed. Yeah.
Do you know if Cage or any of Feldman or Brown did have anything to do with the Dadaists?
Cage certainly knew about them and was interested. He preferred Dadaists to Surrealists. He thought Surrealists had too much to do with psychology, and he didn't like that. But the Dadaists he definitely knew about and was interested in. Yeah.
Did he meet?
I don't think so. I'm not sure. He may, but I don't know. This is a part of his life that is well before I knew him, so I can't say for sure. But I don't get from reading things. I don't get the impression that he did. No. He came to France in 1948, 49, I think.
Yeah.
For the first time. No, well, let me see. No, he was also in Europe in the 30s. He might have met people in the 30s, but I don't think and he was very young then, and I don't think he knew enough to go after them. But it's hard to tell, because Cage had met many people, and he made an effort to meet many people. So,
but he probably knew about both futurists and...
Oh yeah, no, I'm sure he did. And actually there's one person in particular that he did know. That was Max Ernst. Cage always had some contacts with painters, with artists, other than musicians. And I don't know where he met Ernst, but they definitely knew each other well. Because when Cage first came to New York, he had no money at all. There's a famous story about it. And Ernst at the time was married to Peggy Guggenheim, so very rich. And Cage arrived in New York with nothing, literally. Yeah. He had enough money to make a telephone call. That was it. And he used it to call Max Ernst. And Ernst at first forgot who he was and said, "Come next week for a drink." And then he called, and then somehow he managed to make another call. And Ernst said, "Oh, why didn't you say it was you? Come on over. We've got your room is waiting for you." So anyway, he knew he had contacts with that world. Yeah.
When I read about you, and when people talk about you, the four of you, they always say the New York School. What do you think about that term?
Well, it's kind of a convenient label for a very short period of history, what is now history. At the time, and we were certainly close together, we were associated, we appeared together on concerts, though initially the concerts, which usually tended to be around the pianist David Tudor, would be a mixture of our music and the European avant-garde music, so Boulez and Stockhausen especially, in that early period. And so in that sense, we were already part of the avant-garde new music scene, American and European, together. On the other hand, there we were all in New York. And Cage sort of was this kind of center of it, because Cage was the oldest, and he's the one who knew how to organize concerts and did that. We weren't good at that. And who made sure that the music was performed, and realized that David Tudor was the person, to work with. So yes, and we were very close. And the other thing I think is that the negative side of that name, the New York School, suggests that we all did more or less the same thing. And I think you don't have to look at the music for very long to realize that that's quite. I mean, you can't mix up Feldman with Brown, or Brown with Cage, or me with Brown, or whatever. But on the other hand, our music was different from everything else that was going on.
Yeah.
Right? So I think what joined us was our difference from everybody else.
So in one way, there was...
So in that sense, that was the similarity. But in fact, as far as the music itself was concerned, there were ideas that overlapped. Arguably, Cage's notion about chance, at least in a practical way, not they did come from the I Ching and from the Chinese and Zen philosophy, but the idea, the actual working out of it musically, could be said to have been influenced by Feldman, because Feldman very early got this idea of just indicating pitch by high, middle, and low. In other words, not specifying pitch at all, except in this very general way, which was, shocking. That was an amazing idea, because nobody had ever done that. So things like that. So ideas would bounce back and forth. Yeah. Earl Brown had this idea of making durations not by symbol but by an actual line, so you could see how long a note was. Especially in relation to other notes. And Cage, in a sense, he never used that directly, but he did use the idea of having the location of a note in the space of the of the score tell you when you were to play it. So again, it wasn't a symbolic note. It wasn't you counted to 7 and then you played, but you looked and you saw that there was about that much space, and then there was the note, and that's when you played it. Which incidentally, of course, meant that you gave up counting. You had to, in other words, so rhythm had a totally different feeling. It had to do with placing sounds in space as opposed to playing them on a beat or off a beat, which is a very important notion about rhythm. Though in some ways quite traditional. I mean, if you think about, say, Gregorian chant, it doesn't have a beat. I mean, it sort of flows. And this music is a little like that.
Do you think it's okay to use the expression in New York school?
Sure, if you want, sure. As long as you kind of realize that the limitations are
right.
And strictly speaking, I mean, when I met Cage, he had met Feldman a few months earlier, and that was 1950. And the three of us were good friends. On the other hand, I was much younger, and I mean, I was still in school.
You were 16 years old.
I was 16, and these guys were grown-ups. So I was the kid, and I came, but I also had to go home, because my parents wanted me home at a certain time. It wasn't as though I could go out drinking with them. So in that sense, I was a little bit on the edge. So that was what was the New York school to begin with. And then there was David Tudor, but for some reason he didn't hang out much with us. He played, and I mean we were good friends there like that, but I'm not sure. But when we all went out to dinner, David usually wasn't there. I'm not sure why, but now thinking back on it, it isn't that we didn't see him a lot, but he was. Well, David wasn't much of a talker, and both John and Morty loved to talk, so there was a lot of conversation, and so maybe that's why we didn't see that much. But he was there too, there's no doubt about it, too. And then Earl Brown didn't come until, I think, at least a year later.
So he was the last one.
He was the last one to join. And by then, I had already, in a sense, left New York, at least because I was then going to college up in Cambridge at Harvard, which means that I was not in New York for 9 months. I was back and forth, and I came whenever I could, vacations. And as soon as I arrived in New York, I immediately called up, and we got together and stuff like that. But we were already a little bit dispersed.
There was a distance.
And there was a little bit of distance. And then there was a big quarrel between Feldman and Cage about Earl Brown when Earl first appeared. So there were these little funny things happening. But if you keep that all in mind, New York school is still okay, because it does describe something that did happen between 1950 and say 19. It was very brief. I would say 50, 52, 53, something like that. Well, a little bit more. Maybe it's because at one point then Cage moved out of New York. He moved out into the country, not far from New York, but he moved up across the river, across the Hudson. And so that meant we no longer had a kind of geographical base. And then not too much later, Feldman moved to Buffalo, New York. So by then it was all, geographically scattered.
So for how long were you together, the four of you?
The four of us were arguably the four of us were never together because I was already gone when Earl came. But let's say a couple of years, or 3 or 4 years. 3 or 4 years, yeah.
But you still had contact, right, when everyone moved around?
Yeah. Oh yeah, no, we always kept in touch. And we always knew about our latest pieces. I mean, everybody would always be informed, And European composers were coming in and out. Boulez was in New York, I think, in '53. Stockhausen came, so we all saw each other. I mean, that European connection continued in those years as well.
Did you have much to do with each other, with the Europeans?
Well, we followed their music. We were interested in each other's music. Boulez did not like the chants idea, and he didn't like Feldman's and my music at all. He rejected that. He felt we were too primitive.
What about Brown?
I think he liked Brown better.
Yeah.
Yeah, Brown did much better in with the Europeans. And the main reason, I think, is that Brown always used serial pitch methods. All his pitch material is always derived from some kind of 12th tone idea.
Okay.
And they approved of that. I
So
mean,
he's
his other ideas were not like that at all. I mean, the open form and all that stuff, that was totally different. But somehow, because he still stuck with the 12th tone stuff, they decided that was okay. Yeah, of the four of us, he certainly was the one closest to European music at the time, yeah. Cage was just too disturbing for the Europeans because of the
They didn't
chance
like
of it.
him, right?
They didn't. Well, they liked him. Nobody
But-
didn't like him, but they didn't like the ideas.
The composing.
They didn't like the ideas. And as I say, Feldman and myself, they probably thought we were too simple. Yeah.
What do you have in common with Feldman? I get the feeling that you have a lot in common with Feldman.
I do. It's very hard to say. Maybe just this very thing, the simplicity. I mean, it's stripped down quality of the music. There's nothing there that doesn't need to be there. And then for a while I thought what I had in common with Feldman, or what I thought I was learning from Feldman, was that Feldman was very relaxed, not relaxed, but he could, any interval was okay, as far as pitch concerned, or so I thought. There are very beautiful things in some of the early pieces. For instance, I mean, when you look more closely, in fact, they are rather chromatic. I mean, he likes the minor second and the sevenths and so forth. So most of it is like that, but suddenly you'll have this one amazing piece, piano piece, where there are about, I don't know, half a minute's worth, just a whole page of nothing but octaves. This repeated octave, and it just is so surprising and so beautiful. It's not that I tried to imitate that, but that notion of making really beautiful music is. But I don't know. It was just very sympathetic to the music.
What do you think this simplicity is? Why do you like this simplicity, and why is it important to you? Is it only because it appeals to you?
Well, there's that. Yeah, there certainly is that. But no, I think there might be something else. I like to avoid. Well, the simplest term for it, maybe I should explain it probably, is rhetoric. Two things. Rhetoric seems to me to have, do you know what I mean by rhetoric? Rhetoric is what people who make speeches use, and it has to do with certain kinds of formality of presentation, also sort of decisiveness and assertiveness, rhetoric is a way of trying to persuade people, right? Rather aggressively. You want them to believe this, so you do everything you can to make them believe this. And so it seems to me rhetoric has to do with the exercise of power of one person over another, or one group over another. And I never liked that. Let me see, there's something else about rhetoric. But the power is probably the most important thing. And it also, yes, it's an expression of will. And both of those things didn't appeal to me. Now you could say, I think to a certain extent that comes from Cage, and not so much Cage directly as from Cage's interest in these Oriental philosophies, which have a lot to do with not imposing will, with letting things happen. It's a kind of passivity, I suppose, but also it's a matter of not interfering, not telling people what to do, just letting them be who they are, or let them do what is natural for them to do.
So would it be right that you don't want to tell the audience then what to feel or
Exactly. No, I don't want to push anybody around.
It's just the music's just there.
We could put it positively. It's about freedom.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
So the simplicity, you might say, is one way of doing that. It's not necessarily the only way. It's not that I don't like complicated. I love something really complicated and messy. I like that too. But at the same time, I don't want it to be something that sort of grabs you, and shakes you.
Do you have an example for something that grabs you and shakes you?
Oh yeah, Tchaikovsky. Tchaikovsky is so full of his feelings that he wants you to share them, right? And so he just throws them all at you over and over and over again, right? Feel this with me,
Yeah, right.
And sometimes, that's quite exhilarating. It's like you have a friend who's fallen in love and has to tell you all about it, and all stuff like that. Okay, but it's just not, immediately what I'm interested in.
No.
I like to be able to decide for myself. I mean, it's not that I don't want emotion in the music or anything like that, but I don't like to be told what the emotion should be. I want it to be, what I feel. And in the same way, I want it for other people to be what they feel, not what I want them to feel.
So if there is 10 people that listen to it, that would be 10 different
Absolutely,
emotions, right?
absolutely, yeah. And you can test, and that's the way people listen to music anyway,
Yeah, right.
in most cases. I mean, it's true if it's very noisy and loud, they'll say, oh, it's about energy or disruption or something like that. But if you play, especially earlier classical music, Mozart, play a slow movement of Mozart, say for a group of 10 students, and ask each one of them to write down what they think that music is about, what it means, you're going to get quite different responses, it seems to me, yeah? And that seems to me fine, that's very good.
How do you think the performer has to think about the performing of the piece when he has this in mind?
Yeah. Well, it will depend on what kind of music we're talking about, of course, but I think the performer similarly has to get herself out of the way, has to just let the music do the talking.
So not too much.
Exactly. It's not self-expression of the performer. No. I mean, the thing about self-expression is no matter what you do, it's going to happen because you're doing it.
Yeah.
And, and you are who you are, and unless you force yourself to do it in some way that's not what you think you are, then it's not going to be good anyway. But if you really do it in the way you see it and the way you feel it and so forth, it's going to have a character which has to do with you. But at the same time, if you sort of don't worry about that, because it's going to happen anyway. I mean, this is a sort of principle I've worked with a long time. If something's going to happen anyway, don't worry about it. I mean, just work at some other area, because let that be, it's just going to be what it is. Yeah. And so the performer should have, technically have the material under control, and then just try to let the music speak for itself.
Don't force anything.
Just
let the music be the music.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's not easy to do, because if you don't do enough, then the music is nothing. So it's not that simple. No. There's a kind of illustration of that which moved me very much once. Cage organized a performance of Satie's Vexations. I don't know if you know that piece.
The long one.
The very long one. It lasts, 10 hours. And the way he did it was to get he had maybe 8 or 9 pianists, and we just took turns so that we could do it for that much time. And it was extremely interesting to hear, because the first time around, everybody was trying to do it a little differently. And you could hear that. When you were off stage, you could tell the second time, you could tell who was playing, because from the way. And some people were already fairly, detached in this way that I'm talking, but other people made all kinds of efforts to make the music sound interesting, or make it different, or vary it, or just make a lot of effort with it. And you could tell. But then something funny happened, which is that by about the 3rd or 4th time around, and now it was getting to be, we started at 6 in the evening, and now it was getting to be about 11 or 12 at night, and it was always the same piece. It became more and more difficult to tell who was playing. And slowly but surely, it all sounded the same.
Yeah.
And then we realized what was happening is that the music had completely taken over. The music had, dictated, because people were too tired now to worry about expressing themselves or doing something interesting. So they just played the music, and the music played itself.
Yeah.
So it's that kind of thing. And that's easier, you might say, to realize if your material is not too complex. Though, come to think of it, arguably, if it's very complex, it's also possible, because there you're so busy doing difficult things, you don't worry about expression.
Yeah. So that would be kind of the same thing if you have very much a lot of space and no space at all, right?
Right. They're almost the same. Yeah. Paradoxically, yeah. Right.
Just to go back to the 4 of you, what would you say was the biggest difference between you?
Between myself and the others. Well, we were very different kinds of people. Nowadays one mentions things like this, but for instance, Cage was homosexual. We were not. We just. My main difference partly was age. That I was still, a student in college and things like that, and they were already, so to speak, grown-ups in the world.
Did that have anything to say with your socializing, in your social relationship?
I didn't.
That you were very much.
It didn't bother them, no. And the thing is, what I did, I used my parents. I mean, we had lots of parties, often which my parents gave. I mean, I just said to my parents, and my parents were very interested in these people, and they had lots of common friends. So I would persuade my parents. I said, look, why don't we do a party and have Cage and Feldman and David Tudor, but we also, Barres was a good friend of the family, so he would come. And then they were interested in these people who did Oriental mythology and philosophy, and we had a good friend called Joseph Campbell, who became quite famous as a mythology person. And he lived around the corner, and then there was an author, because my parents were publishers, and so they actually published a lot of these books. I mean, the I Ching was published not directly by my parents, but by a firm that my parents were involved in. And that's why John got it. I brought it to him, because my parents had just published it, and I looked at it and said, he would be really interested in this book, so I brought it to him. And then so the author's involved in that, and then this man called Alan Watts, who had just written about Zen Buddhism, and they all knew each other, or sometimes they were introduced by my parents. So that was the social scene, at least one aspect of it. Otherwise, we just go out and eat or hang out or go to concerts. And that would be just us, and the musical people, and then to a certain extent art people, and in fact to a large extent, because they were the only ones who really liked the music at the time. Most people thought it was dreadful, they hated it, very hostile, but the painters were supportive, and some of them liked what it was. They were very relaxed about it, didn't threaten them in any way.
Were you very inspired by art people and painters?
Not directly. I think over the years, yes, but not directly. Yeah, that's the short answer.
But musically and composing, what's the biggest difference?
Okay. First, let me give you a general answer, which is a Cage answer, which I only recently saw and which I liked a lot. Cage said, and this was sometime in the 60s, somebody had asked him exactly that question. And he said, well, he thought that his music was mostly about theater.
Cage's music?
Yeah, interesting answer. He said Feldman's music was about poetry. He said my music was about music. And then Earl Brown, he never liked Earl Brown's work that much. And he said that was more about conventional contemporary music. It was more like...
European.
Yeah. Which is a little unfair. And in a sense has been supported because, I think what Earl did in the earlier years especially is very good. I like it a lot. And what's happened though is that the kinds of things he did were picked up by everybody else. So that his early music has become the standard of a certain kind of new music. So that when you hear his music now, at first it sounds like what everybody else is doing. But in fact he was the first one to do it. So that's a little unfair. But anyway, that's a general and somewhat mysterious distinction. But if you look more closely, Cage's music, well, I think technically it had to do with the use of chance operations, very directly on the material. I think the way he used chance operations was spectacular. That showed genius, because using chance doesn't mean you give up at all. You have to make all kinds of choices. And then the chance sort of answers certain questions, but you have to think of really good questions, and that's what he did. Or think of material. You can't have chance until you have material on which the chance can operate.
Right. So you have to decide everything before you start.
Of course, exactly. And those decisions he always made brilliantly. The ideas are just absolutely spectacular.
So he actually composed the whole piece before starting the
In a sense. Sometimes, he liked the idea of not knowing, or of composing in order to find out what was going to happen next. And I like that idea too. But anyway, none of us worked like that. He was the only one who worked that way.
What do you think you liked not knowing?
I think he just liked not... No, I think it goes back to this idea that we had before, that he didn't, which I spoke for myself, and that is, in a way, that's the thing I have closest to Cage, is this notion of not imposing one's will.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. In that sense, he made the situation possible, but he didn't affect the actual moment-to-moment activity within it.
So it's a kind of a way of not imposing.
Of getting, exactly. So that's Cage, very roughly. I mean, one could go on for a long time about this. Feldman is, I think, in spite of the high, middle, low and these indeterminate things, in fact, has really to do with expression and with poetry. I mean, I think Cage, that's a very good way to see it. Feldman is interested in making beautiful music of a completely distinctive kind. And also with Feldman, what you get is much more than any of the others, is the connection to visual arts. Again, it's not direct at all, even though sometimes it sounds as though it is. But in fact, recently a friend of mine said that the reason, because Feldman always talked about painting. Whenever you asked him about music, next thing you knew, he was talking about painting.
Yeah.
And
it was kind of the same thing for him.
In a way, yes. But I think this friend of mine pointed out, which I think is very smart, that he didn't like to talk about his music. And this was a way of not talking about his music, was to talk about painting instead. But the fact that he could do that and make it persuasive obviously indicates that there were serious connections. And he had very close, both Cage and Feldman had very close friends who were painters, and very close supporters, and whom they were found very stimulating and could relate to very well. But anyway, Feldman's music has to do with this extraordinary sensibility for sound, but sound pretty much the way he wanted it. Not necessarily to express himself, but to get a kind of quality of sound that he liked.
Okay, so even him, he didn't want the self-expression either. Right?
Not in this kind of aggressive, pushy way.
Oh.
Yeah, there's a famous exchange between him and Stockhaus, where Feldman says, "Karl-Heinz, the important thing for me is that I don't want to push the sounds around." And Stockhausen says, "Not even a little bit?" Feldman says, "No, not even a little bit." So there is that feeling. But at the same time, Feldman is Feldman. He had an enormous ego. He was very full of himself. And so it is about Feldman in a way, but in a very, they're all very intelligent, those two. And he knew that to make really beautiful music, you had to get yourself out. You couldn't. I mean, the best works of art are the ones where the artist is almost anonymous. You don't know who it is. Yeah. In fact, sometimes that's literally the case. Take Homer, the Iliad. We have no idea who that was, and there's no way of finding out from reading it. You can't tell who did this. And Shakespeare's a little like that too, and that's why you have all these arguments. Who is Shakespeare? Maybe it's this person or that, because Shakespeare's invisible. Right? Yeah. It's just the word. And so that idea of making oneself invisible is important I think, to any good art. And both Cage and Feldman were very much aware of that. Okay, and then Earl came from a slightly different direction. He came from jazz. He used to play some jazz, and he also came from other artists, but two particular ones. One was Jackson Pollock, and the other one was Calder, Mobiles. And in Pollock's case, it's working in very fast in a kind of rough way, but by making lots of layers, it gets complicated and interesting. And that's the way I think Earl thought of his music, that way.
So also he was interested in
it. Oh yes, very much so, yeah. And he talked a lot about it and so forth. But it was a slightly different kind of art from Feldman's, and it had to do a lot with gestures. I mean, all music has to do with gestures, but I think both Cage and Feldman tried as much as possible to get rid of a feeling of gesture, if that makes any sense. Whereas Earl was perfectly happy to make gestures, and he would talk about that.
Could you explain a little more
about that? Yeah, it's hard. I don't know if I gesture.
Could you see that in the music?
Yeah. I mean, you'd have a certain kind of motif, say, in Earl Brown. And it would be about the motif. It wouldn't be about necessarily the individual sounds in it. It wouldn't be about the sonority even. It would be about just doing this thing.
Okay.
And that's something that neither Cage nor Feldman really ever did. They were interested in the sound. I mean, the sound might be more. It might have a whole bunch of notes in it, but And to a certain extent, it's a gesture. I mean, I'm maybe not myself clear, about this, but let's put it this way. In Cage and Feldman, it had more to do with the process, and not sort of single gestures within it. Which doesn't mean that, say, Feldman might have a very kind of homogeneous procedure for a while. Everything sounds more or less the same kind of thing, and then suddenly something rather surprising happens, like those octaves, and then you get a little bit more, which like what was before. And you could say that the octaves are like a gesture because they stick out. But somehow he managed to do that in a way that they didn't feel like a gesture. It was still part of the same surface of the music, always the same surface. And Cage similarly, in Cage you might say guaranteed it because of the chance procedures, which might result in a gesture, but they were not a gesture. I know, you could say that a gesture is a sort of musical event which shows signs of having been deliberately made. It's, in a way, again, it's like that notion of rhetoric, where you quite self-consciously get up in front of people and make a gesture, right? As opposed to not thinking about yourself at all as in a conversation, you're interested and you talk. And that's maybe one way of explaining it, what I mean by gesture. Yeah. Okay, that leaves me. Where do I fit into all of that? I very rarely use chance procedures.
Why?
Well, Cage was doing it. And I also enjoyed, the thing is, what I couldn't understand with Cage is that once he'd set up the system, basically he just had to do what the system told him to do. So, he tossed the coins and then he wrote something, he tossed the coins and wrote something else. And that would drive me crazy. It's too boring. Just the process. I mean, I'm not saying that the music that Cage wrote wasn't wonderful as a result, but I couldn't work like that. He was capable of imposing on himself a kind of discipline, which was very severe. I mean, it was like, it was religious. I mean, it was like saying the same prayer over and over for 2 hours, or doing some very meticulous kind of work under very strict conditions. And I couldn't do that. I don't have that temperament. And I like very much writing the notes, writing this one and then thinking, okay, we're going to go there now, I'm going to write that now, and so on. I just enjoy doing that. And working in that small way. So the chance doesn't allow you to do that exactly. I mean, I will use chance sometimes to determine certain things, but almost never the note-to-note procedure or the choice of individual sounds. So I didn't use chance, and what else could I say? I was interested in indeterminacy, but okay, this is maybe the most single thing that distinguishes my work technically from the others, is that I was the one who was most interested in having this notion of indeterminacy, open form, whatever you want to call it, that kind of freedom, be the result, not of the process of writing, as in Cage, where he tossed the coins, not as in Feldman. Feldman, arguably, most of his music has nothing to do with indeterminacy. Only those earlier pieces with the high, middle, low. Though in some sense that doesn't have to do with indeterminacy either. Because he was just using that as a way of composing with sound masses, or sound weights. And he knew exactly what he wanted. It wasn't that he was writing it so that he would be surprised by what came out. He might be, because the musicians might do something bad, but basically he knew what he wanted, and that was the way to get it, and it involved a certain amount of...
And that's also how he writes his music, it's notes.
Yeah, well later then, I mean, he gave that up. He gave up this high, middle, low stuff, and then just wrote the notes. No, it has absolutely nothing to do with indeterminacy. Whereas I was always interested in it, but I was interested in it specifically from the point of view of what happens when you actually play a piece. In Cage's case, until much later, well, in some ways, not much later, but in the actual composing process, Cage makes something that the performer has to play. Sometimes the first way that he introduced indeterminacy, you might say, in the performing situation, by allowing certain pieces to be played with other pieces simultaneously. You could do, or to allow various versions of the same material. So winter music is for 1 to 20 pianos. Yeah? You can do it as a piano solo, you can do it with 2, 3, 4, up to 20. Yeah? And obviously the piece will be somewhat different, but the material is exactly the same.
Yeah.
It's the same material. But nevertheless, it's open because you don't know how it's going to come out. But still, the players have to prepare that material and play it exactly the way it's written.
Yeah.
Okay, they can't respond to each other.
No.
Like that. Everybody works independently, and then it all happens simultaneously. Okay. What I got interested in is the notion of what happens when 2 or more people play, and what one person plays affects what the other person does, either intentionally or non-intentionally. And so the whole notion of interaction between performers was a kind of key thing for me. And none of the others did that. That's the single most differentiating thing that I
How did you come up with that?
I think first I came up with it by trying to find some other way of doing indeterminate music. Yeah. Other than by composing by chance or by allowing these pitch choices that Feldman had within a fixed rhythmic situation. And I thought, well, why not try this interactive model? That's it. I think, yeah. And then, as the years went by, many years, I got interested in politics, but not till the late 60s. And then I realized, or somebody actually pointed out to me, that way of working has a kind of, it's like a political metaphor. It suggests collaboration as opposed to competition.
Yeah.
And so I liked that idea, and so maybe subconsciously I had a tendency that way, and so that's where it came from. But certainly at the time it wasn't conscious, the political side of it.
In what pieces did you use this method?
Well, the first one was Duo for Pianists 2.
Yeah.
That's with the cues. It's this whole notion of cueing.
Yeah.
It's the title of my book, right? Cues.
Yeah.
That something happens and you make a response to it. Yeah. And in some way, all of my music is, in a general sense, is about that too, because I think of, why do I decide to write the way I do? And at first, at the very beginning, I just was looking for brand new ways of making music. And I was pretending that music had never been written before. And if you were to start from scratch. That's what was most distinctive about that period in the 50s, that all of us thought that way. We thought music had come to a dead end. And it was time to start all over again, and just to rethink the whole business of what it was to make music. That's, I think, the single most important quality then. And I did that, and so came up with some of these curious ideas, which meant partly not thinking initially necessarily in terms of, say, melody or counterpoint or melody with accompaniment or all those standard models of how you make music, but just think about it as sound and how you put the sounds together. Yeah. There were some models. I mean, there was perhaps the most important, apart from the Viennese school, the Varese was probably the most important composer for us. Because he definitely thought only about sound. And if you look at his music, I mean, there are little melodic things in it, but mostly it's about sonority. You can't analyze it in terms of pitch organization or even structure. But you have to do it in terms of the actual quality, the timbre. You have to do it in terms of the quality of the sonority, the quality of the sound itself. Which is, where music starts from. Right, so,
So what would you say is that you were most alike? What's the four of you?
Well, I think what I said earlier, which is the fact that we were different from everybody else.
Yeah.
There's nothing else like that going on.
So you weren't alike in any way in the music?
I don't think so.
What about self-expression?
Sorry?
Self-expression, what about that?
I think, again, we were all, not interested in that particularly.
So that would be something that you were alike?
Yeah. I think in different ways. Feldman, as I say, in some ways, but in a very refined and very intelligent way, was about self-expression.
So he had a bit more of a self-expression.
Yeah, but it was very paradoxical, because Feldman himself, personally, was a very imposing person. He was big, he was loud, he was funny, entertaining, had outrageous opinions about everything. He sort of really occupied a lot of space. He's a big person, noisy. But the music, very delicate, very quiet, completely the opposite of the initial impression that you got from the man. So in that sense, the music was not expressive of the, of Feldman as a presence. But the intensity of the music and the devotion in the music, and the fact that it always sounded, you could always tell that that was Feldman's music, meant that it was also about Feldman. I mean, it was some secret, some other Feldman, or it was Feldman sort of completely redirected. I mean, the intensity of the music, that's the paradox. It's so little and yet it's incredibly intense. That's the link. I mean, it's the intensity of the person that comes into the music. Cage, on the other hand, seemed to me always, Cage is a very complicated figure, but he seemed to me in some ways a rather, and he worked on this, because, I mean, there were other factors obviously, but interested in this sort of Oriental notion of being dispassionate, of not pouring out feelings, and not this romantic stuff, but very self-contained, and, open to the world, and but nevertheless, a certain distance and coolness about Cage, which I think is in the music too, even though the music is very beautiful. And he has things that he feels strongly about. I mean, there's no question about that, absolutely no question. But nevertheless, it's contained, emotionally.
So, to summarize, what makes you all
different?
Different and the same? The difference. Well, you talked
Well,
about.
I think I'm just going to repeat myself.
Yeah.
And I don't think that it's not really good. I think to try to get it into a single formula.
No.
But
obviously, you were like in the way that you were different from everything
yes,
else.
Absolutely, absolutely. And also, I think to a certain extent, this idea of not being rhetorical. Of not being self-expressive in the standard romantic way. Let's put it that way. Because the assumption was among all composers then. I mean, life is so complicated.